Hello, everyone. Welcome to our next session for the Scaling Atlassian track. I want to let everyone know there was a little error in the app. It says the session's 15 minutes. It's actually 40 minutes, so buckle in. It's going to be a good one. We're really excited about this speaker. He is brand new to the Atlassian family. Scott Blacker, who was head of product at Agile, now Jira Align, but he's going to come up here and talk about scaling Agile to the enterprise, the 5 secrets every executive needs to know. So without further ado, give it up for Scott Blacker.
Thanks. Cool. Hello, and thank you guys all for coming here today. As mentioned, my name is Scott Blacker. For the last 4 years, I've been the head of product at Agile, and very happy to come here today as part of the Atlassian family with Jira Align to talk to you guys about some of the patterns and secrets that we've seen that executives have had to overcome as they look to scale Agile within their enterprise. And I'll put a little bit of responsibility on you guys, and I've already done my first one here. So we've been playing a game with us at Agilecraft that every time we say Agilecraft and not Jira Align, we have to do a shot. So I'm not going to do any shots up here. But if somebody can be my counter, right, then I will just do that many shots tonight at the party. So it's cool. Let's see, clicker. OK, so great. So just to kind of set the table here, what we've seen at Align over the course of the past couple years, and really the reason that we built the product in the first place, was that we've seen companies investing heavily in their digital and agile transformations, but they're in general struggling to harness the power of agility and see the business results come out of that investment. What does that mean? Well, typically, organizations will be fantastic at the Scrum level. They've implemented Scrum or Lean. The teams are doing a great job. And maybe even they've integrated their DevOps platform and are starting to get some strategic value out of their DevOps investment. But from an organizational perspective, when you think about the reasons why organizations invest in an IT modernization or digital transformation project in the first place, it comes down to business outcomes. They're looking to drive innovation, become more competitive, right, to reduce costs or increase revenue within their product lines. And the reason is that achieving enterprise agility has not just become a luxury for organizations, it's become an imperative. We've seen over the course of the past 20 years that software has gone from being something that has been primarily IT-driven to a strategic imperative within almost every large organization around the world. Banks compete not only on their ability to uncover and bring to market innovative financial projects, they compete on the basis of the user experience delivered via their software. Right? How do I interact with my mobile application to do mobile trades? How do I interact with a website? Right? How fast is my claim for a healthcare insurance company in terms of processing? All those things are driven by software, and unless large organizations, large enterprises make meaningful investments in achieving organizational agility, they don't have the ability to react fast enough to stay competitive in the global marketplace. And so, when I say enterprise agility, a lot of times we get the question, well, what does that really mean? What is enterprise agility? So I'll define it for our purposes today as 3 things. First is that as an organization, you've built a predictable delivery engine. Just as Scrum teams have gotten really good at delivering 30 story points a sprint, on the first Monday of the sprint, I know pretty well that I'm going to get plus or minus 5 or 10% of what the team thought they were going to do by the end of those 2-week periods. Large organizations are trying to build a predictable delivery engine at scale. What does that mean? Well, over the course of this quarter, how many features or epics can we deliver? What value are we going to align to attempt to deliver over this longer period of time? Without a connected enterprise that allows you to really connect strategy to execution, establishing predictable patterns at that next level of scale is very difficult. And so that's one. We see the desire to build a predictable delivery engine at scale. Now, once you know what you're getting, and once there's some predictability in what you're building out, the next thing becomes about value-driven investment. And so we know we're going to get roughly X at the end of the quarter. What are we going to build? And that means, right, what are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve, assigning value to those outcomes, using objectives, using key metrics as an indicator of success. Not did we deliver an epic or did we deliver a feature, but did we achieve the outcome that we wanted? We think of that as value-driven investment. You can do that at a macro level, and you can get all the way down to a very micro level. And the tighter you make those feedback loops between the outcomes you're looking for and the release of software to market, the faster you can get feedback from what's happening, and the faster you can incorporate that feedback into what we call pivot or persevere cycles. If you're familiar with the principles of, for example, Lean Startup or Lean Enterprise by Eric Ries or Barry O'Reilly. And with a predictable delivery engine and with the ability to drive value-driven investments comes this concept of a strategic adaptability. And that is what organizations are trying to achieve. When something happens in the market that's affecting our ability to compete, we're a large bank, and a small fintech has come on the scenes and is eating at our heels, right, looking to capture some market share. Can we react and adapt from a strategic perspective and then pivot the organization towards a new set of investments with some sense of predictability that we know what we're going to get on the other side? But there's a challenge. As organizations try to harness the power of agility that is so infused and so natural to what the teams are doing on a day-to-day basis, it becomes, there's a gap, so to speak, right? How do we take that spirit and how do we infuse it into the organization to achieve agility at scale for predictable delivery, value-driven investment, and strategic adaptability? And that's what we're going to talk about today, right? The 5 secrets that every executive needs to know to achieve enterprise agility and to achieve those 3 outcomes. So first, systems thinking is very different from a kind of a localized perspective. And what you see when teams self-organize, which is a basic tenet of Scrum and Agile that we've seen in place over the past 20 years, is that the teams will locally optimize, right? This team is optimized to win the race, 4 people coming together to achieve a common objective. And that's fantastic. They practice, they execute, everybody knows their roles, they work in unison, right? It's a very beautiful thing when that comes together. But when teams work in isolation or in loose coordination, they get used to working together in a variety of patterns, which may or may not be relevant for system-level optimization. And when you're talking about scale, that's what becomes important. And so we see patterns, right? Everybody knows why, I think at this point, right, geese fly in a V, where, you know, the geese come together and the lead one kind of breaks the wind resistance and other geese fall in line behind to work together. A pack of lions on the hunt work together as a team. A football team on the pitch works together to achieve an objective. But what if the goal is something larger? What if, as a large organization, teams of teams need to work together in a systems-level approach, right? So the mission of a Coast Guard unit, right, might be to save a life, right, to intercept a pirate ship. Each boat has a team that has to work together to achieve an objective. But when working as a group, right, those crews need to come together to achieve a larger objective. And so from a systems optimization perspective, those teams of teams need to understand how to coordinate. They need to practice in a mission, right, together. Many of examples of this, right, to save a life or to move forward. Number 2, so we're going to play a game here. Since we're in Vegas, we'll play a game of Holdem. There will be a time, many times, kind of within your journey to scale Agile, where you need to decide whether or not you need to push forward and insist on a common approach to something, or whether it's okay for the teams to locally optimize, right? So when do we have to optimize for the system and agree to something, and when can the teams do what they want? So in this game, you are somebody that is working for an Agile Center of Excellence, or you're an executive, and we'll go through a couple of scenarios, and we're going to decide, is this something that we need to insist on? Is this the mountain we're going to die on, or is it okay, and right, we're going to let folks kind of go with their own individual approaches. All right, so my first scenario, and this is kind of a bang your head against the wall thing, right? And this is, I would say, in the first week of an implementation, you walk into an organization and you think it's going to be relatively simple. What are we going to call this thing that sits above a story? And you can wind up in a 2-week debate about whether it's going to be an epic, or it's going to be initiative, or it's going to be a feature, or it's going to be an epic, right? You're used to this, right? So SAFe, anybody here use SAFe as a scaling framework, right? Familiar with that? So in SAFe, we know there's a thing called a story, there's a thing called a feature, and there's a thing called an epic. right? And in Jira, there's a thing called a story, and then that's called an epic, and then that's called an initiative. So now what, right? Is a feature an epic? Is an epic an epic? Is an epic an initiative? And this is the passion that goes into these kind of debates is somewhat unbelievable, but understandable. And so the perspective here is this something that we need to focus on, right? Is this a Holdem or Foldem moment? So as an executive, is this something that you insist the teams align on and drive to a common semantic understanding of the work that's being done across the organization? Or can teams call what they want to call things what they want to call? So who's going to hold them? Have to align on semantics. Who's going to fold them? Teams can call what they want. Kenny says, hold them. So, by the way, this is just my opinion, right? Not necessarily. There's plenty of ways to kind of approach this. But in general, what we see, if there's not a common understanding of semantics and a common understanding of language across the organization, it gets very confusing. And so on one hand, one team might say, well, we're getting ready to finish this initiative. And somebody from another business unit or another part of the organization hears that, and they think, great, that's a small unit of work. But really, that was a $5 million investment. And so this concept of being able to compare apples to apples versus apples to oranges to create a common semantic understanding so you don't wind up with this Tower of Babel approach, I think becomes pretty important. And that's one of the things that we tend to focus organizations on during the first phase of a scaled Agile implementation. And there's a couple of tricks, right? So, and this is very common. So in Agile Craft, that's a shot. In Align, you can configure the terminology. And so what we'll encourage people to do is just write feature and then in parentheses Jira Epic, right? And that kind of, that'll work for a year or two, and then after a while, right, they just kind of align on what they're going to do. All right, number 2, sprints. We want a 1-week sprint. We want a 2-week sprint. We want a 3-week sprint. We want to start on a Monday. Our sprints start in the middle of the week because people tend to be out on Mondays, right? So you wind up with this a desire from some folks to align on a common cadence for sprints across the organization, or at least within a program or portfolio. And other parts of the organization want to maintain a fierce set of independence so that teams are empowered to choose the length of their sprint and when they want to work. So, hold them. Sprints have to align to a common cadence. Fold them. It's cool. Teams can start what they want. Kenny says, fold them. So this is one of those things where it doesn't really matter that much, right? As long as each team is driving towards some level of predictability and the sprints can roll up and there's some sense of kind of how those teams work together. Now, if you're using SAFe and you're in a common program increment and the teams need to align to use something like a program board, if you guys are familiar, then it becomes pretty important for that kind of locally within that program for teams to align. But in general, the specific day that a sprint starts or the specific kind of length of a sprint time, those things can be aggregated and normalized at scale to take a lot of the bumpiness out, and you can still use kind of the right metrics to roll up what teams are doing from an investment perspective across the organization. Okay, yeah, bonus question. Who knows who this is? Somebody? Fibonacci, right? So, except I actually found out when I was putting this together, his name is not actually Fibonacci. His name is actually Leonardo Bonacci, who lived during the 1200s, and then in the 1800s, a sculptor who was doing a sculpture of him made up the name Fibonacci with the prepend, and so I don't know if that's true or not, but I read that, and it seemed interesting. Scoping. This is very common. So we'll be in a room with somebody who is at the head of a portfolio, and they might be relatively new to Agile as a concept because they've got a background in kind of a more traditional PMI style. And they're looking at what the teams are doing, and they, of course, understand the concept of story points. And the question is, well, this team over here, as a 5 is, roughly what a developer would do in a day or two. And for this team over here, a 5 is that takes 3 developers all week. So teams have a different sense of what a number is. Your 1 is my 5, right? 3s aren't the same. And so the question is, how do I get every team within the organization to normalize on a common understanding of what a 3 is so we can roll information up? So, Holdem every team needs to normalize on a common definition of what a number is. Fold 'em. It's cool. Teams can do what they want. Kenny says, fold 'em. This is, in general, what we've seen is that the law of large numbers tends to normalize this stuff out. So, of course, if I'm comparing two teams and I'm doing something really bad, like saying which team has the highest velocity, you have a 10 and you have a 40 and the 40 is better than the 10, that's a massive anti-pattern and something that's, fundamentally people know you shouldn't do. But then I've got a 10 and a 40 and I can do on average, right, 50, and what does that mean, right? The teams aren't equal in what they're pulling together. But, and that, fair enough if you're talking about 2 or 3 teams, but we're talking about enterprise agility, right, and the ability to expand up to dozens and hundreds of teams across thousands and 10,000s of developers. The law of large numbers just washes that out. Over the course of a quarter, we do 7,000 story points, right, for this program across 15 teams that are working together. And so you can look at a velocity of the program, and as teams contribute to that, it's fine that there's some differences between what those teams are doing, at least what we've seen. Okay, number 3. We've seen transformations that come from the top down. There's an executive mandate to transform, right, from a very kind of command and control perspective. And we've seen grassroots transformations where organically the developers kind of independently start to adopt Scrum and Lean practices, and it becomes part of the common culture, and then naturally teams start to make scrums of scrums and scrums of scrums of scrums. But either one of these approaches in isolation is typically destined to fail. From a command and control perspective, you see team resistance, right? This just adds work, right, is a common thing, right? The teams are already doing their stories. I don't want to have to parent a story to a feature. I don't want to have to input all this data, right, around an initiative. It feels like you're just burdening me and I don't get the benefit and you're just telling me to do it. And you wind up with limited buy-in from the team, limited buy-in from the middle of the organization, and they tend not to take hold, right? There's no hearts and minds campaigns, if you will. From a grassroots perspective, for folks that are leading organizations, as they see teams start to adapt more agile, a more agile approach, there tends to be some fear that can creep into the system, right? I'm going to lose control over what the teams are doing, right? I can't get easy access to the data to understand if the investments that I think we should be making, that we've agreed as an organization, are actually being executed because they exist in story point format, right, spread across 5 different servers and 3 different team tools, right? There's limited visibility, right, and in general, right, kind of could be from an executive standpoint, why am I making this investment? The teams are already agile. Why do I need to invest in something that's going to scale? And so instead of thinking about it as a command and control or solely grassroots, right, we kind of start to think of it as a cycle, right, where strategy, goals, and priorities are set, right, at the top level of the organization. They flow down, right? The team is empowered with the knowledge of understanding why what they're doing is important, and the teams in turn deliver predictability, information on spend, and achievement against outcomes. But the real kind of benefit is in the middle, so where portfolio, product, and development come together. And so you kind of see that the portfolio managers, product managers, and folks that are leading the development organization, when they buy in, when you kind of have the hearts and minds of this middle, it works. So you've got a top-down funding, right, and mandate that we are going to scale because there's a bought-into benefit of what the organization is trying to do. From a grassroots perspective, the team wants the organization to succeed. They want to be outcome-driven. They want to participate in achieving against the objectives of the organization. And it comes down to how does that meet in the middle, right? Is it a middle-out transformation? Does that meet in the middle? But it's really all 3 levels that you want to see bought in. And we've seen a couple of examples of this. I think 2 fantastic examples from customers of ours are AT&T and Anthem in the healthcare and telecommunication space, where we see fantastic efforts right within the middle of the organization. There's a mandate to scale. There's a grassroots buy-in. And there's a phenomenal team across product portfolio and development within an Agile Center of Excellence that's working together to make everybody successful. I've seen other examples where it hasn't worked. Even with a grassroots movement from Scrum Masters who are impassioned and want the organization to succeed, there can be a frozen middle in the organization that isn't interested in driving that kind of scale, and it can be a massive inhibitor to being able to scale. This is a company we worked with a couple years ago out of New York. So what do you do about this? You want to start from the top and the bottom, right? You want to make it a safe environment to fail. If parts of the organization are fearful that if they conduct an experiment and it doesn't work, that there's punishment for that, that's when things can start to freeze. People are afraid to change. They're afraid to experiment. We know this is a core tenet of what it means to be agile. And secondly, and this is kind of something that I think folks don't think of a lot, is let's find some common problems to solve that are across the organization. And the first one that we tend to encourage people to focus on is that of dependencies. Right? So let's find something that everybody can agree is a problem. Let's find something that everybody wants to improve upon, and then let's focus on that. And so just to show you guys one of the screens from Align here, this is a dependency management module within Align. And every connection in that wheel is a dependency between two teams. And we don't think of dependencies as do A, then B, and when A moves, then B moves, and things move out. We think of a dependency as a contractual commitment between two teams, two people that agree to do something at a given time. For me to do A, I need you to do B, right? And then when B moves, right, A is not going to move as well. I'm going to flag A, that we're at risk of not delivering that. It forces a communication between two people on the team, and it forces a collaboration, right, that helps remove that dependency. And so then maybe we'll do the work earlier. Maybe it's okay if that moves out. Maybe I'll find somebody else to help, right? Teams don't like dependencies. They want to remove these obstacles so they can deliver on time. Executives hate dependencies because it's an indicator of organizational complexity and drives down predictability of results. And in the middle, right, it complicates the job of folks that are trying to manage the program and portfolio as they have to navigate through these things. So a common problem, right, that the entire organization can agree to is something that we like to help people focus on. All right, secret number 4. Many teams don't actually want to scale. There can be a fear of transparency. There can be a fear of micromanagement, right? And so I've heard in some cases, right, Jira can be the last great bastion of the developer that doesn't want anybody to know what they're working on, right? It exists in a backlog, but maybe that backlog just has stories on it that maybe don't make sense to anybody else, and they're not laddered up into features, right? There's not a sense of connectivity. And from some developers' perspectives, that's exactly what you want, because nobody really knows what we're working on. But in general, the thing that's driving that fear is a fear of comparison, a degree of the wrong metrics being used. And so if the organizational perspective is, we want to see what the teams are doing so we can manage them more tightly, or we want to see what the teams are doing so we can put in metrics that compare teams, that's going to be a bad thing. And so and I'm sure you guys have kind of seen this quote before, but the idea is we're not driving the teams and putting tools in place so that developers can build stories faster, right? Those are Scrum practices. Those are the technical things that you do on a day-to-day basis to build software. But empowered teams understand the mission of what it is that we're trying to do, right? There's something larger at stake, right? It's an organizational imperative, right, to become the absolute best in the mobile banking space and to be the #1 app in the iOS store. And that's the kind of thing that's going to make us proud, right, to have been part of this organization that kind of delivered this kind of value to the organization. If we understand what our mission is and what the core objective of the organization is, then, right, that's the inspiration that folks are looking for, that can really drive that impassioned need or desire to make the work I'm doing transparent so that I can understand how the work that I'm doing as a developer supports the overall organization. And so this is an example of a Y button in Align up here on the left. Any developer can click on the Y button on a story, and they can see why that story is important, because it ladders up to this feature, ladders up to this initiative, ladders up to this outcome. This is one of the things that, as part of the new acquisition, we'll be making available within Jira. in the very near future, so that any developer using Jira who's connected to Align can be empowered with the understanding of why the story they're working on is important. And now you transform the conversation from something where developers don't want transparency because they don't want people to understand, be able to compare them, to where that transparency is a mandate in order for me to understand and get empowered by the message of why what I'm doing is important. And so when the CEO walks down the hallway and asks me what I'm doing, I don't say I'm working on updating this database table in this product somewhere. Instead, I say I'm working on helping our company become #1 in the mobile banking space, right, and crushing the competition. And it's directly linked to that outcome. So transparency, accountability, and then one other secret here is finding the right metric. And I think this is important too, because a lot of the fear around that transparency comes from that comparison. If I don't trust that you understand that it's okay for two teams to have a different velocity. And they did 15 and we did 20, and therefore they're worse, and you're going to make them work harder, and that's not right. And so this screen, if interpreted wrong, can be scary, right? This is another snapshot from Align, and over on the left, mobile, that's a quarterly increment backlog. So 6 sprints, 6 teams, 2,500 story points. And then I wanted to get a snapshot of the teams here to see, well, which teams are becoming more predictable. And so if we all agree that the Baltimore team is doing worse than the Cowboys team because they only have 300 and some points instead of 500, then you've lost the whole thing, right? That's the absolute wrong metric and the wrong way to interpret this information, right? If I want to look to see that the Baltimore team or the Cowboys team is more predictable than the mobile Scrum team, that's a great metric, right? To understand and help drive the teams towards predictability, right? So that they can consistently commit to and then deliver units of work in a sprint is a fantastic thing. And that's the kind of coaching, right, and the kind of metric that teams should welcome, right? And maybe it's fine that the mobile Scrum team is delivering their stuff at the end, but in general, from a value delivery standpoint, we look to reduce work in process. We look to deliver incremental value over the course of a quarter, right, over the course of a unit of measure. And so finding the right metrics to drive the teams towards can be very important. And then 5. So our last secret here is that in order for teams to effectively achieve those 3 outcomes that we talked about, a predictable delivery engine, value-driven investment combined with strategic adaptability, knowledge has got to flow seamlessly through the application, right? And so we'll walk into an organization and we'll typically see this pattern where I've got spreadsheets and PowerPoint presentations for my roadmap and prioritization. The ALM tool is disconnected from the PPM tool. There's a variety of plugins on different servers that may or may not be talking to one another. And because knowledge doesn't flow through the organization, an organization can't become connected. And a connected enterprise is the key, right, to providing the transparency, visibility, and collaboration needed for scale. And so when you look at aligning the entire organization, you want the enterprise aligned to the portfolio, the solution, the program, the team. Right? In the middle, it's the portfolio, product, and scale development organizations working together to collaborate. It's connecting, right, the overall enterprise agile planning tool to the variety of tools that teams are using to execute DevOps and agile functionality, right, and portfolio functionality if you're using something from a prioritization perspective. It's about organizing against a framework, right, that provides some common sense of what are we doing and how are we organizing ourselves to achieve agility. These kind of things are very important to enable the smooth flow of knowledge and data throughout the application. And that's why we built Align, right? It's to solve this problem so that the connected enterprise can come together and build a common source of truth. And so that everybody has access to the same data, maybe with their own unique individual lens. And so those are the secrets, right? If organizations can take a systems approach, can choose their battles wisely to empower the teams where appropriate and to insist on organizational norms from a system optimization standpoint when necessary. If you take and acknowledge that it's got to be both top-down and bottom-up and empower the middle to drive true change within the organization, empowering your teams, finding the right metrics, and enabling knowledge to flow seamlessly throughout the application. If you can do these 5 things, your journey to connecting your enterprise and creating a true organization that embodies enterprise agility will be much more productive and a much easier journey. That, in conclusion, kind of brings you back to where we started, which is why are we doing this thing in the first place, right? To achieve these outcomes, and by imparting these kind of things and enabling these kind of practices, we believe that you can infuse your organization with that sense of agility and better achieve these outcomes. And so I want to thank you guys. We've got about 10 minutes left, so I want to open it up to questions and happy to engage the audience.